Before we begin, I'm not a historian. I am not an archaeologist. I'm just curious. This isn't history. It's a quiet question hiding inside something ordinary. The kind of question you might miss entirely, until one day it refuses to leave you alone. What you're about to hear is stitched from bones, tides, and whispers, from stories our bodies remember, even if our minds have forgotten, from myths that drift across oceans and continents, from humans who walked, waded, and sometimes swam in worlds we barely imagine. Listen not for certainty, listen for curiosity. Listen for what lingers in your own hands, your own fingers, when they get wet and wrinkly. Because sometimes the body remembers before the mind does. And sometimes the strangest questions begin in the most ordinary places. Now, before we start this episode, I have to give props to my sister. The question came from her when we were just, chilling in her veranda. It was late night. And she turns to me and she asks, do you know what happens and why it happens when we get our hands wrinkly when we deal with water too much? And what do you think my answer was? Maybe the same one you've been saying all along? Oh, it's just, I don't know, they just wrinkle because they just spend too much time in the water, so then they just get wrinkly like a prune, right? So that was the question that she asked me that sent me into this curious world. It's really, really interesting, and it's a bit different, and it's a bit light from myths and Bible stories and all of that. So just for us to have a little break, I hope you really enjoyed this one. And thank you, my sister, from my heart. Remember your name. Have you ever stood in the bath or shower, stared at your fingers and noticed your skin all pruny, soft, almost weird in texture? You probably thought, too much time in the water, right? That's normal. Happens to everyone. But have you ever asked why that happens? What if I told you it's not just about soaking? Not just water being absorbed into your skin. Those wrinkles are not an accident. They're a tiny hidden trick your body performs without asking. A trick your nervous system pulls off, quietly, as if to say, here, now you can hold on, you won't slip. Your fingers, your toes, turning into natural tire treads, grip where you need it most. And if that's not wild enough, it's possible this small feature, the wrinkly fingertips, it's a faint echo of something much older, something aquatic. So when the body leaves us with strange little clues like that, humans tend to do what we've always done. We tell stories about it. Even science stays cautious. Myths tend to wander. Across continents and centuries, stories surface. Different languages, different gods, different skies, and yet the same strange pattern. Water. Humans. Something in between. In ancient Mesopotamia, there's a being known as Oans, half man, half fish, said to rise from the sea to teach humanity writing, agriculture, knowledge. Not a monster, not a warning, a bringer of civilization. He's often linked to the Apkallu, wise figures described as emerging from the waters, bridging the human and the divine. And then you travel elsewhere. Different cultures, same undertone. You move west into ancient Syria and Philistia, and you meet Dagon, sometimes associated with grain, sometimes later depicted with fish-like qualities. A god tied to fertility and sustenance, worshipped in coastal regions where land and sea intertwined. You travel to West African traditions and encounter Mamiwata, a powerful water spirit, often depicted as part human, part aquatic, associated with beauty, danger, healing, wealth, and deep knowledge. She moves between worlds, river and land, spirit and flesh. You move into Celtic waters and hear whispers of selkies, seal beings who shed their skins to walk as humans. Liminal again, neither fully sea nor fully land, always belonging to the threshold. Even in Greek mythology, long before Disney softened it, there are the Oceanids, daughters of the primordial ocean, embodiments of rivers, springs, and sea currents. Different names, different shapes, same pattern. Water as origin, as teacher, as a threshold between worlds. Now, none of this proves aquatic ancestors, but it proves something else. That across continents, humans consistently imagined wisdom and transformation rising from the sea. Stories of river spirits, ocean mothers, beings who move between land and water like it's nothing at all. Not always mermaids, not always creatures with tails. Sometimes they're just liminal, belonging to thresholds, to shorelines, to the place where one world touches another. And maybe that's the key. Because myth doesn't always preserve facts, but it preserves feelings. It preserves environments, relationships, fears, dependencies. If entire communities lived by rivers and coasts, if survival depended on tides, fish, currents and storms, water wouldn't be just geography. It would become identity. And identity becomes story. So over generations, memory shifts. Not into science, into symbol. Fish men, sea spirits, water teachers. Not because humans had gills, but because water once held power, mystery, and life itself. And maybe myths aren't trying to tell us that we came from the sea in a literal sense. Maybe they're trying to say something softer, that we belonged near it, depended on it, feared it, listened to it, that for a long stretch of human time, the shoreline wasn't a holiday destination. It was home. And then something strange happens when you zoom out. Not into biology, but into memory. Because when you look across the world's oldest stories, a pattern begins to surface. Different continents, different languages, different gods. And yet, the same event keeps appearing. A world before the waters, and a world after. In the Hebrew tradition, there is the story of the great flood in the book of Genesis, where Noah builds an ark to survive a divine reset of humanity. In ancient Mesopotamia, a civilization far older than the biblical text, the Epic of Gilgamesh, tells of Utnapishtim, warned by the gods that a catastrophic deluge will wipe out civilization. In ancient India, sacred texts describe Manu, warned by a mysterious fish that a flood will soon swallow the world. And in Greek mythology, Deucalion and Pyrrha survive a cosmic flood and repopulate the earth by throwing stones that transform into humans. Different cultures, same memory. A world swallowed by water. And then there is perhaps the most famous drowned civilization of all, Atlantis, first described by the philosopher Plato in his dialogues Timaeus and Critias, as you say it. He tells of a powerful island civilization that vanished in a single day and night, sinking beneath the sea. Not a kingdom beneath the waves, a kingdom lost to them. And here's where things become uncomfortable, because geology tells us something important. At the end of the last ice age, global sea levels rose more than 100 meters. Coastlines shifted, vast plains disappeared, entire human landscapes, settlements, hunting grounds, migration routes, were swallowed by rising oceans. Not mythology, geology. So maybe these stories weren't invented from nothing. Maybe there's something else. Cultural fossils, memories carried not through DNA, but through story. Because if your ancestors watched the horizon move inland year after year, if villages vanished beneath rising tides, if the land itself disappeared, you wouldn't write a textbook. You would tell a story, and you would tell it again, and again, until memory slowly transformed into myth. And that brings us back to something smaller, something far more personal. Not entire continents, not ancient civilizations. Just your hands, your fingers, because if water shaped the world our ancestors lived in, it might also have shaped the bodies they carried, and the small adaptations those bodies kept. Here's what actually happens. When your skin wrinkles in water, it's not just soaking up moisture like a sponge. It's not passive. In fact, scientists discovered something surprising. The process is controlled by your nervous system, the same system that makes your heart race or your palms sweat, quietly takes command. Signals travel through what are called the sympathetic nerves, the part of your nervous system responsible for automatic responses. Those signals cause the tiny blood vessels in your fingertips and toes to constrict. As the volume beneath the skin changes, the surface pulls inward, and the wrinkles appear. Not random folds, but structured channels. This discovery became clear when doctors noticed something unusual. People with certain nerve damage don't develop these wrinkles in water at all, which meant the body wasn't just soaking, it was actively responding. Then researchers decided to test something even stranger. Do the wrinkles actually help? In 2013, scientists at a Newcastle university ran grip experiments using wet objects like glass marbles and small weights. The participants were asked to move them as quickly as possible, and the results were unexpected. People with wrinkled fingers handled wet objects faster and more efficiently than people with smooth skin. The wrinkles acted exactly like tiny drainage channels, allowing water to move aside and improving grip. Evolutionary biologist Mark Changizi even compared them to rain treads on car tires, small ridges that help maintain traction when the surface gets wet. And suddenly, something that looked strange started to make sense. If our ancestors spent time wading in rivers, climbing slick stones, gathering shellfish, or handling slippery fish, wrinkled fingertips would have been very useful, maybe even important. A small adaptation, quiet, automatic, triggered the moment skin meets water. Your fingers and toes performing a tiny survival trick that most of us never notice, until we sit long enough to ask why. So, if our nervous system actively reshapes our fingers in water, if our bodies prepare for grip the moment we're submerged, we have to ask a bigger question. Grip for what? Wet rocks? Slippery fish? Riverbeds? Evolution rarely keeps useless tricks. Natural selection preserves or improves survival. And that question led some scientists down a fascinating path. In 1960, marine biologist Alistair Hardy proposed something unusual. While studying marine mammals and human physiology, he wondered whether some human traits might make more sense if our ancestors had spent significant time in shallow aquatic environments. Not fully aquatic, not living like dolphins, but perhaps wading, swimming, and foraging along coastlines and riverbanks. Decades later, the idea was expanded and popularized by writer Elaine Morgan, who argued that several human traits seemed unusual compared with other primates. The idea became known as the Aquatic Ape Hypothesis. The theory suggests that at some point in our distant evolutionary past, early humans may have spent considerable time in water-rich environments, estuaries, lagoons, river deltas, and shallow coasts. Not mermaids, not Atlantis, just hominids living at the edge of land and sea. Supporters of the hypothesis point to several intriguing human traits. Humans have subcutaneous fat distributed under the skin, more typical of marine mammals than other primates. We have an unusual ability among land mammals to consciously control our breathing. Human babies display a diving reflex, automatically holding their breath and slowing their heart rate when submerged. Our upright posture, bipedalism, makes wading through water easier than walking on all fours. And small, subtle features, fingertips that transform when wet. Now, here's something important. Most mainstream paleoanthropologists remain skeptical. There is no fossil evidence of humans going through a fully aquatic stage. Many traits can be explained through terrestrial pressures. But the question the theory raises hasn't disappeared. Not whether we were sea creatures, but whether water played a larger role in human evolution than we usually imagine. Archaeology keeps pointing back to the shoreline. At Pinnacle Point on the southern coast of South Africa, near Mossel Bay in the Western Cape, we find a key Middle Stone Age site with evidence that early Homo sapiens, around 160,000 years ago, were harvesting shellfish, using stone tools, and exploiting coastal resources, which gives insight into how shorelines may have shaped human evolution. Other coastal sites reveal shell middens, fish remains, and tools designed for marine gathering. Marine foods are rich in omega-3 fatty acids, nutrients linked to brain development. Some researchers suggest this contributed to the growth of the large human brain. And modern research on wrinkly fingers supports the idea that small, specific adaptations could improve survival in wet conditions. Experiments led by Michael J. Carroll and colleagues have shown that wrinkled fingertips enhance grip on wet objects, a clear functional advantage in shallow water foraging. So maybe we weren't sea creatures, but maybe we were something else. Shoreline creatures, creatures of estuaries, of reeds, of mud and tide pools, human living where land and water constantly meet. And if generations spent time climbing wet rocks, handling slippery shellfish and fish, gathering food in shallow water, then a small reflex that improves grip suddenly makes perfect sense. Not fantasy, not mythology, just adaptation. And these adaptations weren't just in our bones or genes. They live on today, in the hands and bodies of people still intimately connected to water. While theories drift and myths evolve, there are people today whose lives are still deeply woven with the sea. Not as metaphor, as reality. In parts of Southeast Asia, there are communities often called sea nomads, people who live almost entirely on the water, generations born on boats, children learning to swim before they can properly walk, life measured in tides instead of calendars. Among them is a group known as the Bajau, sometimes called sea gypsies. For centuries they've free-dived for food. No oxygen tanks, no modern gear, just lungs, salt water and inherited skill. Some of these communities can free-dive to depths of over 20 meters, holding their breath for several minutes at a time, surfacing only to dive again and again. Not as athletes, as daily life. But here's where it stops sounding like folklore and starts sounding like biology. Researchers studying the Bajau discovered something remarkable. Their spleens are on average significantly larger than those of neighboring land populations. The spleen acts as a natural oxygen reservoir. When you hold your breath, it contracts, releasing oxygen-rich red blood cells into circulation, extending how long you can stay underwater. Meaning, these populations aren't just culturally adapted to the ocean. Their bodies have physiologically adapted too. Not gills, not fins, but subtle shifts, quiet evolution happening in real time. A larger spleen means longer dives. Longer dives means better survival. And over generations, those who could dive longer passed that advantage on. This isn't science fiction. It's evolution still breathing. And it doesn't stop there. Across the Pacific and Indian Oceans, there are other diving cultures, pearl divers, spearfishers, island populations where breath holding isn't a party trick. It's daily life. The ocean is pantry, road, and inheritance all at once. Some adaptations are genetic, others are trained into the body from infancy. Culture and biology quietly shaping each other. No sudden mutations. No dramatic transformations, just some shifts. Generation after generation, water leaving fingerprints on the human body. And when you see that, when you realize human physiology can still bend, still respond, still adapt to the sea, those wrinkled fingertips don't feel so strange anymore. They feel familiar, like a small ancient mechanism, one that never fully left. And maybe that's the strangest part of all. Not the myths, not the theories. The fact that the evidence might be closer than we think. Because after Bajau divers, after shoreline cultures, after generations shaped by saltwater and breath, we come back to something almost embarrassingly ordinary compared. Your hands in the bath, your child in the paddling pool, your fingers in the sea, wrinkling, soft, folded, quietly transforming. And suddenly it doesn't feel like a random quirk anymore, because we now know this isn't passive, not skin bloating like wet paper. It's neurological, your body reshaping itself in real time. Grip where it matters most, traction when things get slippery. A built-in adaptation that switches on only when needed. And maybe that's what makes it so eerie. Not that it exists, but that it waits. It doesn't live on your skin all the time. It doesn't announce itself. It activates in water, like a mechanism waiting for the right world. And the more you sit with that, the more a strange question begins to surface. How many small mechanisms are still tucked inside us? Ancient, quiet, functional, waiting for the right environment to wake them. Because evolution doesn't erase everything. Sometimes it keeps things folded away, dormant but not gone, not dramatic enough to notice, not obvious enough to question, just subtle enough to survive. And maybe wrinkled fingertips are one of those things. A tiny reflex from a world where grip in water mattered more than we remember. A soft echo. Not loud, not mythical, not supernatural, just biological, just human. And somehow that makes it even more mysterious. And maybe that's where the story truly ends. Not in ancient oceans, not in forgotten civilizations, but in something much closer. Something you carry with you every day. And after all of that, after the floods, the shorelines, the myths, something curious remains. Not ancient tablets, not lost continents, but the quiet relationship humans seem to have with water itself. Because while stories travel through generations, the body carries things differently, quietly, without language. You don't need to believe in Atlantis to notice what water does to us. You don't need mythology to recognize the strange pull of the sea. You don't need archaeology to feel what happens when you imagine being unable to breathe underwater. Some reactions live deeper than thought. Instinct doesn't ask for permission. It just arrives. And maybe that's why water holds such a strange place in the human psyche. We're drawn to it, calmed by it, hypnotized by it, and yet terrified of it in the wrong context. We float in it before we are born. We play in it as children. We travel across it as adults. But take away air, and it becomes one of our oldest fears. Not fire, not darkness. Drowning. A fear shared across cultures that never spoke to each other. A fear children understand without being taught. And when something is that universal, you have to wonder, is it taught or is it remembered? So maybe the real mystery isn't why our fingers wrinkle in water. Maybe the mystery is why water still feels so ancient to us. Why it comforts and unsettles at the same time. Why entire civilizations built their lives around it and told stories about losing everything to it. Why myths keep returning to the sea like a tide that refuses to stay gone. And why the human body still reacts to water in ways we barely question. Wrinkling, holding breath, fearing the moment air disappears. Maybe these aren't random quirks. Maybe they're echoes. Because what if we are not afraid of drowning because of mythology? What if mythology exists because humans have always been trying to explain the feeling? A feeling older than language, older than scripture. Something memory itself can't quite hold. And what if somewhere inside us, not in the mind, but in the body, something still recognizes the water? Not as an enemy, not as something unknown, but as something we once knew too well. Thanks for dipping your fingers and your mind into today's tides. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I just found it super interesting how our body responds to water, and I just thought it was worth to share it with you all. Do come and share your thoughts or ask questions. You know how little they are. It doesn't matter. There's always something there. So do come and share it. You can find us on Instagram at Bloodline Myths. on TikTok at Bloodline, a story we forgot to tell, or on the channel YouTube, Bloodline, a story we forgot to tell. And on SoundCloud, if there's some soundtracks that you like of the episodes and they didn't make it there, do come and tell me. I can always release it and swap them around. Just come and share your thoughts. Come and follow us. Come and show our support. Gives us a 5-star rating. Would be really nice. And hello, new follower, Leah. Thank you so much for getting in touch and for asking questions. And thank you to all of you that still follow me and still keep diving in with me in these crazy threads. And while you're on SoundCloud, don't forget to go and check out Hempenology channel. There are some absolute bangers in there, and there's like all kind of genres, all kind of feeling. Go and have a look. Go give us a follow, show your support, share us about. Do all the nice things. It will be quite nice. Thank you truly for listening. And remember, even your fingers know more about the ocean than you think. Until next time, bye!
Open the dark, let the storm walk in. Drums in the dark.